My guest at this time is a journalist for Sports Illustrated who specializes in the world of professional wrestling. It's our good friend Justin Barrasso. Justin, welcome back to the Wrestling Daily.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure spreading the gospel of pro wrestling with you. Thank you for having me, Nick.
Oh, man, Seth Rollins is gone, and you're picking up the gospel gimmick here, I guess.
What's today? Today's Thursday afternoon Messiah? I don't think so.
Thursday Night Messiah? I don't know, man. It doesn't. I mean, I bet that domain
doesn't have that ring to it.
Make some stained glass out of you, you'd be fine. So, well, Justin, before we get into kind of the news of the day, and there's been some big news here. Again, we're gonna release this early next week, but we are recording this here on Thursday afternoon. Let's reflect here a little bit, man. 2020 was a big year for professional wrestling. When people look back on 2020, what do you think some of the biggest takeaways and things that people remember from this very weird period will be?
You know, for 12 months, I don't know how many years we fit into 12 months, but you look back at the beginning, Nick, like look at the Royal Rumble. It's just a different landscape. It's a different time, right? Look at Wrestle Kingdom 14. Yeah. That feels like it was years ago. A packed crowd on the Tokyo Dome. Tetsuya Naito becomes the guy in New Japan. Ibushi can't get over the hump as great as he is storyline wise. Drew McIntyre. Which was a surprise at the time, right? Drew was a villain. You know, people forget, and I'm a huge Drew McIntyre fan. Drew McIntyre was the sidekick for a while to Shane McMahon. I mean, that made no sense looking back. Like Shane should have been the mouthpiece for this larger than life, incredible superstar.
Yeah.
And I remember we were at a house. No, it was a dark match in Boston, and McIntyre worked the Fiend after the show during the red light era. Or, you know, the red. Kind of an odd
where they would put the red light on during the Fiend matches, and that was like part of the gimmick, right?
Yeah, and I remember the guy next to me, my buddy Mike, who we go to the shows together for years, and he said, are they going to turn him babyface? And I said, I mean, he's got the look, right? And then come January at the Rumble, and they kind of strap the rocket, as they say in wrestling, onto McIntyre. But to me, everything changes after Revolution, but Revolution, one of the best stories. It doesn't get enough credit just because it's not a wrestling thing. It's just the timeline, right? We're always moving on to what's next, no matter sports, wherever. But Chris Jericho and Jon Moxley, like I think Moxley had a pretty special title reign. They started off on the right foot. They had a great story from November of the prior year into February at Revolution, and that tag match, that Bucks Hangman Page Omega tag match, wasn't the best match of the year. It's so subjective. It's hard to say, but it was special. So yeah. Then you get into the pandemic era, Nick. I'm giving you a long answer to a short question.
Oh, that's fine.
And the pandemic was. You look back at that early Raws, even the early Dynamites. To me, Dynamite, like think of the it was the Hager match with Moxley.
Oh, that was so weird. Yeah, there was the no holds barred, right? They brawled everywhere or something like that, right?
And the presentation was so different. Like obviously, and now AEW has fans. They did by a few months later they'd have fans again. But and WWE with NXT has a few too. But the wrestling it was such a wrestling when done best. Like I thought Wrestle Kingdom was a good example. Wrestle Kingdom 15. It was magical to see Ibushi win the title, to defend it the next night. Good conquering evil. And there's a lot of ways to present pro wrestling at its peak. There's not just one way to do it. But to me, it's kind of like when the wind hits your face. You can't always describe it, but you can feel it. Wrestling, lost a lot of that magic when you took the crowd away. And it's been an ongoing battle to figure out how to best present this ever since. Even Money in the Bank. Looking back at that pay-per-view, they were taking chances, which is great. But it was so different.
I didn't like Money in the Bank, man. I mean, I appreciate taking a chance and everything, but that thing, I mean, that was hokey, man. That was not my.
But that's the whole point. Nobody knew, and there were so many odd things like we never thought we'd see in pro wrestling.
Sure.
I think we're at a point now where, like, I think come next Mania, if it's not, it wouldn't be. I mean, they'd have the Thunderdome, right? So they'd have a better setup, or some kind of wherever it would be, but. It would look they finally found kind of a groove because you need a crowd. It's integral in pro wrestling. So it showed the magic of the fan base too. Quite a year in 2020.
Yeah, and you bring up Wrestle Kingdom 14 to 15, right? And I think it is a kind of interesting story. I would talk a lot about North American wrestling, and one of the big stories going into 2020 with the North American scene was the New Japan expansion, right? Because I mean, the plan was for them to just really kind of go at it here in the States and really try to put together some big shows. They were going to play MSG again, and it looked like they were trying to kind of separate from AEW. There were, this was not going to be two entities that were working together, especially under Harold May. As we roll into 2021 here, we just last night saw the Good Brothers, come out on AEW Dynamite. We saw a Too Sweet reunion. They didn't call them Bullet Club, but like, what's your vibe here? I mean, Tama and Fale have come out and kind of, tried to put. You never know if that's real or if they're all playing together. But what's your take on the vibe going into 2021 for New Japan and AEW? Do you think there's more going on here, or do you think we continue to see them stay each other's distance?
Let's take that step by step. I do think that it's interesting. Like last night for us, that moment with it, Gallows, Anderson, Omega, the Bucks. Like, to me, that, and you could criticize Impact or say I think their stuff's been really good lately.
Yeah.
But like, if people could say, why would AEW want to partner with Impact? What do they get out of it? I think last night's show, that moment alone, that was a pretty spectacular, special moment that I think would draw viewers away from, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. That would draw viewers away from a really phenomenal, hard-hitting Finn Balor, who's still hurt, match against Kyle O'Reilly, who's this emerging star in pro wrestling, and a guy who's paid his dues and is gonna be one of those guys at top NXT sooner than later. We're seeing that evolution now.
Yeah.
I thought last night was awesome. That moment with the Super Elite or whatever you want to call them, but that Too Sweet moment. Yeah, it was to me, it showed how you can do, like, everybody can win if you team up, and that never happens in wrestling. It's like, why would I team with them? Well, if you do it right, everyone can win. And I think it's really interesting, Nick, as a translator, because I don't speak Japanese, and Okada knows a little bit of English, but I think in an interview setting, he feels more comfortable with the translator, and I totally get it.
Yeah.
And so the answers are translated, but his comment in our interview last week, leading up to Wrestle Kingdom, was he'd love to have a super show. He mentioned WWE. He mentioned AEW. I think that right there is, and that's not something, I don't think he just was off the cuff and said, because I asked goals for the upcoming year, and that's what he mentioned. So I don't think it was something, in my opinion, he just came up with off the top of his head. I think that's something that's been talked about internally. I mean, AEW has proven themselves over the last year that they have a very special product. Tony Khan's got a great finger on his pulse with this business. It's a real team effort. There are so many people in AEW that are well respected in New Japan. Look at Chris Jericho, for instance. Don Callis now has a good relationship too, connecting some dots. I don't know if they will connect in 2021, because to me, that's something you do in front of a live crowd.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think, it makes sense now with Kenny and with Kota Ibushi as your two champions. I mean, come on, that's storybook.
The Golden Lovers collide, right?
And if Kenny is really what he says he is, storyline wise, he's this purveyor of championship title belts, then you'd need the most prestigious of all. You need the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. And it'll be fun too if that storyline plays out like that, Nick, or similar, where Kenny keeps winning belts. Kenny wins the Impact Championship, which has a cool history too. And some big stars added. Some, AJ obviously helped to find that belt too. And the fun part would be the fall, like him losing the belts. Who does he put over an Impact that wins the belt and reclaims their company? In some ways, I loved when the NWO started to crack, because that was like a chance for WCW stars to stand up for the company. So I don't know. I just think, not to say it's that storyline, but I think there's a lot of potential if that storyline's continued. And I think, kind of touching on your point, you need New Japan to make it really special.
Yeah. Well, as we finished up 2020 and rolled into 2021, obviously it was like a really melancholy end of the year with the passing of Brodie. I know you talked to John Silver like shortly after Brodie's passing there for Sports Illustrated. What was it like getting to chat with that guy, with as close that he was to Brodie? I mean, what is your reaction to the passing of Brodie Lee?
I mean, horrible. A guy at the top of his game, or finally doing what he wanted. WWE obviously had a lot of faith in him for a lot of years, because he was you need stars like that in your promotion to have it work. You just can't have all main eventers. They liked him in the middle of the card. Clearly they had a lot of plans for him,
Yeah.
lower card stuff, not what he wanted. He wanted to be, and I don't blame him, right? He wanted to be a standalone act. He didn't want to be supporting cast, and he got that opportunity finally in AEW, and he was making something special. So to speak with Jon Moxley, and I reached out to Jon Moxley. I was at 84. I wrote the piece, and I said, before even speaking to John Silver, and I reached out to Moxley and said, out of all the people I could think of, I'd want to talk to you. You guys just have the most history together, pre WWE, in WWE, post WWE, headlining a pay-per-view together in AEW, but even just the WWE stuff like Shield and Wyatt. Like, I know it wasn't always a huge Dean Ambrose feud with him, but like that was all Luke Harper, but that was always, they were always connected.
Yeah.
So Moxley was the guy that I wanted, but I was honest with him. And I said, listen, if you don't want to talk, I mean, your friend just died. Like, you have no obligation to even respond to me. And he said, let me think about it. And I said, great. And he got back a little later and he said, I'm still thinking about it. And I said, great. And he said, I want to talk. And I said, all right, then. I mean, it's a chance to honor a friend. And that's what I hope that piece captured the essence of Jon Huber, of what he built in pro wrestling. With John Silver, a little bit different of an interview because just the relationship was so different.
Yeah.
That's someone who was learning from Brodie, or, and just, but also too, I mean, hard not to be emotional and get choked up when you're on these calls and you're talking about your friend who, in Moxie's case, had just passed away a few hours, and in Silver's case, had been a couple of days. But talking about how, I didn't know that story, that after that tag match, the Cody Cardona tag match with Reynolds and Silver, it was Brodie backstage saying, hire these guys. Like, why are we waiting? Why are they on part-time deals? And now he's not, I mean, obviously he's the leader of the Dark Order, Nick, but he's not their real life, that's just a wrestling storyline. But for him to take that initiative and take that ownership of his partners, of his teammates, I love that story. I thought it was devastating. I still think it's devastating. And that's something that's going to leave a major void in pro wrestling for a long time, his memory and his absence.
Yeah. And, on that Celebration of Life show that they did, obviously, we saw Sting and Darby Allin alongside each other. And, we've talked offline outside of this about Sting's kind of debut at AEW. The last time we talked, I was telling you how I really thought that Sting had made the leap because he wasn't able to get that match with Undertaker in WWE. And he's kind of come out and confirmed what it is that I told you. I haven't talked to you really since then, but are you surprised that WWE wasn't able to put something together here with Sting or Taker, even for like a cinematic match to satiate both these guys and keep them both kind of in the bubble that they've got?
Well, I guess we don't know, and I'd love to ask him next if I ever get another chance to speak with Mark Calloway, the Undertaker. Yeah. We don't know what Taker thought, if he was interested, if he wasn't. I don't know why he wouldn't be. I mean, to me, that's a money match.
Yeah, it's a cinematic bell, right? I mean, there's a lot of ways you can play with different things, and whatever. So I don't know.
Right. Though Taker didn't work another match post, and that might not be an anti-Steve Borden thing. Taker just didn't work another match. And we mentioned money after WrestleMania. We mentioned Money in the Bank, which is funny to think. Like, Money in the Bank, there's still WWE still pushing the idea we're going to see Styles Taker again. Because remember, he sees or he opens the room. Is there a casket in the room with Money in the Bank? And like that feud was still ongoing.
That's true. There was that little teaser afterwards that there could be more between those guys. We just never kind of got it. Yeah,
I'm sure Vince McMahon still wants it, right? I think Taker was the one who said, "I'm done," and we'll see if that actually lasts. But because it's very rare when people stay retired in pro wrestling, unless your name's like Steve Austin, right? I mean, very rarely do people not come back. His last match was what, WrestleMania 19?
Sure.
But where were we? Sting. So, but it doesn't, the sad part is, Nick, it doesn't surprise me that WWE or Vince McMahon wasn't interested. They weren't interested in Sting. Sting was, what's the difference if you're a WWE fan, or the way WWE presents, and I think he's a legend, so I'm not knocking him, but what's the difference between Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who was a legend in the, the Flair matches, the Savage WrestleMania 3 match, which I don't know if it's the greatest of all time because of Hart Austin a decade later at Mania, but it's right there, right? But like he's no different than Steamboat. Sting to me is probably bigger than Taker, just in terms of everything with WCW, and that's not the way he's presented in WWE. he's presented as kind of another one of the legends. He was part of that Ric Flair. Was it the 70th birthday party? He came out and was one of the legends, shook hands, and Sting to them was always, I say to them, to Vince, always just another guy, which is crazy because the fan base always said otherwise. The fan base, like that Cena tag match on Raw was awesome.
Yeah.
Those moments, every Sting moment on Raw was gripping, was compelling, was different, was new. Everything. And it just never felt like it was home for him, though. Even the match with Seth Rollins, which that match, we could do a podcast on that, Nick. That match is such a bizarre match. They have it's like two matches. They have the match. It's pretty good. He takes the turnbuckle power bomb. He's obviously struggling. He's trying to fight through. He locks on a scorpion deathlock that's weak. You can see he's in pain. Mm-hmm. The crowd explodes, but the crowd is loving this. Then, all right, so he kind of recovers and you get out of the match. No, he locks it on again, and the crowd goes nuts again. Like people were hungry for more Sting. So it doesn't surprise me that a couple of years, 5 years later, people are interested in AEW. We didn't see the end of that story. And I know that's not how Steve wanted to go out. So I'm excited to see what happens next. I think he's in good hands with Tony Khan. Tony was Tony's favorite wrestler. And I know Tony's grown up a lot since then, but I think he still holds certain memories and certain moments in high esteem. I don't think he'd ever treat Sting on air the wrong way. I think they're going to make sure there's too much at risk. Him at 61, they're going to make sure he's safe and that he works with opponents that work safely. And
but I mean, what do you think of how a lot of people are, I hear from a lot of people they're, like get to. We're not really seeing what a clear direction here for Sting yet. Are you?
I think we're seeing too much of him, to be honest. I wish we hadn't seen him as much.
That's great. That's a good point. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, Sting is special. One of the things Vince did well, and you can like Vince or dislike Vince, and you can like Hulk and dislike Hulk, but one of the things Vince did really well whenever he had Hogan was he never really overused him. He kind of, just throughout their history together, and the business was different too, but like he spread out Hogan's appearances. They did that well. WCW at times did it well too, but to me, Sting is an attraction. And what makes an attraction? You don't see it every week, because you see it every week. It's just another part of the show. I wish we'd see a little bit less of Sting, knowing he's there, knowing it's a multi-year deal, and he has AEW tattooed, to his soul. Sure. That doesn't change that, but I think we're seeing him too much. I don't want to see him every week. When Sting pops up, I want it to be like, wow, that's, where did that come from? So I think they're still kind of getting there, but that's a brand new story. They're still kind of figuring that one out.
Couple things I wanted to ask you about. From the world of NXT. So last night, obviously, we saw New Year's Evil. I thought it was a really good show, and like side by side with AEW, and AEW had some big moments. That Snoop Dogg splash that's been gifted a million times today was a big moment for them. But I thought moment for moment, I think NXT maybe had a better show than them last night. There was just a very fluid story, and there were a lot of characters that spun out last night. I thought that were much different, maybe more elevated. Kyle O'Reilly, Finn Balor. Talk to me a little bit about what you think that Finn Balor has done for Kyle O'Reilly. I know you said earlier you see him as kind of a guy moving up the card. You think that's a permanent thing, or do you think we're just kind of, this is a one-off, maybe testing the waters type deal?
Before I answer that, Nick, great question. Before I answer that, because it connects to you, we did the call with Triple H, with Paul Levesque. The last time we did a Triple H call, you were on it, I think. I'm pretty sure you were on it. It was before TakeOver War Games, right?
Yes.
And that was right before Sting. Excuse me, that was right after Sting Day. Maybe Sting debuted on a Wednesday. The Triple H call was on a Thursday. Am I? Does that sound about right?
You're right about that, because I remember making jokes about who was going to be the first person to ask Triple H about what he thought about Sting's AEW.
Sting. All right. Well, because you made a great point, because I think that night, that Sting night, the Winter is Coming episode, side by side, just in terms, like, NXT has been churning out these awesome shows, and not to say AEW is not great too, but like there's not many flaws in these NXT shows.
None.
But AEW is doing a tremendous job of generating significantly more buzz. But the NXT shows, I think, are very old school wrestling shows where every segment kind of moves forward. And not that AEW shows aren't good. AEW, the point being, AEW is getting a lot more hype, but the NXT, it's not like NXT's just because they're losing the ratings battle. The shows aren't good. The shows are really good. And whatever happens with the ratings last night with the New Year's Evil, I agree. The Snoop spot was huge, right? Like that's what the takeaway from today. But again, a great, I watched it after because I always watch AEW first. I watch NXT after. I wanted to watch that Balor O'Reilly match. And because the problem with the first one was that was Kyle's breakout moment in NXT as a singles wrestler, but nobody's talking about that. We talk about the jaw injury, right? I mean, and Finn was pretty open about it in the interview this week, how difficult that process was, that recovery process, and how it's the most painful thing he's had to endure, really in his wrestling career. So it really overshadowed the match. I thought last night was a different story, but another physical presentation of Balor and O'Reilly. Just being a big fan of O'Reilly's work prior to WWE, prior to NXT. And from everything I've heard from inside the Performance Center, they are high on him. This is not a short term. Let's put him with Finn and give Finn an opponent.
Yeah.
It's to build, to elevate Kyle. And I think that these two matches, we don't look at Kyle as, and I'm a huge Bobby Fish fan for what it's worth, but I don't think we just look at Kyle as Bobby Fish's tag team partner. I think we look at Kyle O'Reilly as a single superstar, and that's the goal, because it didn't necessarily feel that way at War Games. I thought Kyle was overshadowed by Adam Cole, by Pete Dunne, by Pat McAfee. So I think that last night was a very important moment for Kyle O'Reilly.
Xia Li, man, out of nowhere. I mean, not out of nowhere. They've been doing these great vignettes here for weeks, but man, completely rebuilt, re-debuted in my opinion last night. This is my favorite thing going on Wednesday nights right now is her and Boa and this mystery figure. Is it grabbing you the same way right now?
It is. It's got that mysterious element of pro wrestling, and you just hit on it too, Nick. Like there's a way to rebuild something and present something. Wrestling's so much presentation. Well, I get why it's frustrating with wins and losses, right? Like things matter in pro wrestling, and the way she was presented on NXT last night was special too.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think who I would compare that to. Obviously, very different, just in terms of presentation. I think Darby Allin, AEW's done a really nice job of making sure that this guy, who wasn't real, who I shouldn't say wasn't really, was not a national entity, in mainstream pro wrestling before AEW. Wasn't like he had a run in New Japan or a run in WWE or NXT. They're presenting this guy as to me, Darby Allin could main event their shows. Like he's a bona fide main eventer, or at least trending in that direction.
Yeah.
I thought last night, again, they add a lot to the show too. And a wrestling show should have multiple pieces. I think that AEW is probably doing that better than WWE right now, just in terms of a little more variety. But Wednesday nights are great. Wednesday nights, I don't think we'll ever see Triple H wave the white flag and move to Tuesdays, even though it'd be great that we could, or Thursdays or whatever. It'd be so nice to focus on one show at a time, but I don't think they'd want to admit defeat. And WWE or NXT, they have the benefit of long-term planning. They've got such a big roster. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but I don't think I think the Wednesday night battle will continue for the foreseeable future.
All right, and lastly here, Justin, we look ahead to the next big WWE pay-per-view, the Royal Rumble. It is an open field, in my opinion, this year. Men's and women's Rumble matches. Who would you like to see come out on top? What's the stories you want to see told going into WrestleMania's main events this year?
I originally would have said Big E, but with the Intercontinental title now, I kind of want to see how that run that plays out and give him some time with the belt. And like Big E's a unique Intercontinental champion. I believe the last WrestleMania he had the IC belt was WrestleMania 30, and he was thrown in the Andre the Giant Battle Royal, which is one thing. It's another. He wasn't even a key player in it. That wasn't like his moment to win. So why is he Intercontinental champion then? If you're not gonna run with the guy, I think now we're gonna see a much different run. Everything I hear about Bruce Pritchard is fully on board. Big E wants to see him grow, wants to see him become a main eventer. So I don't think Big E wins the Rumble anymore. I tried to ignore the gambling lines. I know the odds came out for Daniel Bryan.
I wonder how they come up with those odds, right?
I can tell you a quick funny story. I'd have to look up the guy's name, but somebody reached out from one of those groups and said, "Hey, we got a guy who does wrestling odds. Do you think that'd be a fun story?" And I said, "Yeah, that's an interesting story, right? So I got the guy on the line, or we were on the phone, and I'm like, all right, this is a story with a ton of potential. How do you figure out, like, how do you figure out the odds for a match? Because sometimes the odds are very one-sided. Sometimes they change the morning of a pay-per-view. So there's inside info involved, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, we just guess. And I'm like, you just guess? He's like, yeah, man, it's a pretty crazy, you just watch the product and you guess. I'm like, I watch the product. I'm like, I
What?
can't run this store. Yeah. And then, obviously that's not the case. And we never ran the story because he wouldn't open up. I think it's a fascinating story, though. ESPN, I think, did a piece on it a couple of years ago. That was in depth and was pretty good. But before Rumble, I feel like, too, a couple of years ago. But I do think that's interesting. I am not sold on Daniel Bryan winning the Royal Rumble. I feel like WWE's hinted at that before, and it's always ended in abject disappointment. I think he'd be a unique person to win. I think that Bryan having his Rumble moment, especially, I believe, when he says he's starting to wrap up his career as a full-time performer, I think that'd be a great moment. I'm a Bianca Belair guy. I love her winning the Rumble. I love her challenging Sasha at Mania. I think that would be a cool moment. I almost wish, Nick, that I think Sasha was the performer of the year in 2020. Cross wrestling, I think she was incredible. I almost wish that she didn't beat Bayley till Mania. She won the Rumble. She challenged Bayley, because that Hell in a Cell match was just everything it could have been and more. That match was,
Sure.
It's impossible to be better than you do. You and I do something special the first time. You always compare it to that. So to compare that to their takeover match in Brooklyn from 2015, that August, to be better than that match, it's remarkable, especially with the pressure going into the rematch. So I would go Bianca Belair. What about you?
Man, I have some wacky thoughts about the Rumble. I think Daniel Bryan will probably take the men's Rumble. First to announce, usually has like a good track record. And Roman Reigns, the stuff he did with Kevin Owens, incorporating the family, man, Roman Reigns, you want to get heat on Roman Reigns, have him threaten Brodie, right? Have him go after that adorable little daughter of Daniel Bryan. And you can bring Brie Bella into it. I know she's kind of interested in doing more, even though she just gave birth to her second child. I think there's just a lot you can do with Daniel Bryan. I'm pretty fine with him with the men's. Over on the women's side, Bianca Belair makes a lot of sense. I mean, but that, I forget who it was that I was talking to recently. It was like last year Edge made the big comeback. This year they feel like the women's match is going to have the big comeback, whether it be a Becky Lynch or a Ronda Rousey. So I'm less decided on the women's match, because I do foresee some kind of big return in that bout to kind of set the stage for whatever the main event picture is going to look like for the women at WrestleMania.
Nick, you mentioned, the odds are kind of in your favor when you declare early you're in the Rumble. Bobby Lashley was right there too.
True.
I wouldn't be opposed if Lashley won. Drew McIntyre would have to beat Goldberg, which actually I'm not devastated. If McIntyre beats Goldberg at the Rumble decisively, I think it's a great use of Goldberg. You put over your current star. Now, if McIntyre loses that match, that's a different story. But I loved Bobby and Drew. I love that match. They had their physical, their hard hitting. It's very believable that either one could beat the other. They're two of the best at what they do. And then you could have Bryan or whomever else, win the pay-per-view in February, if that Elimination Chamber this year, and then, get to Mania that way. So I wouldn't be, I like Bobby Lashley. I think he's earned a run as WWE champion. I'd be okay. I'd be on board for that too.
Yeah, I don't know. Lashley would be an interesting choice. I don't know that he's got the momentum. I mean, they seem really happy with him in that upper mid-card title picture.
Yeah, they do.
I heard him and Riddle maybe tangoing going into Mania, and that kind of seems to make sense from where they're at on the card. I'm not.
Once you get stuck in that mid-card spot too, not that it's a bad spot to be, but very hard to get out of.
Very tough, and I think Lashley is the defined. And I think post WrestleMania is going to be the more interesting time to watch the Hurt Business. I think they're going to look strong at WrestleMania and come out the other side of it maybe better positioned to kind of go with what you're looking for. But on the Raw,
I just hope they're an entity in 2022. They have a long-term potential that would be, if they stay together, or a guy gets knocked out or kicked out or added, like that long-term has so much potential. And I think that in general, wrestling fans are craving really in-depth long-term stories. So that would be a great one.
And speaking of that, just to kind of put a cap on the Rumble discussion, if McIntyre beats Goldberg, which I think it's likely. It sounds like Goldberg got brought in because they just didn't know what to do with Drew and they want him hot going into Mania. Big win over Goldberg certainly does that for him. And I'm not trying to overthink it because I think that is what's going on. But they also like Goldberg holding the title, especially come WrestleMania. He's always marquee. You always do 500,000 more viewers than you usually do for the one segment or whatever where he pops up on SmackDown. So as much as hardcore fans don't like to see it, Goldberg does draw. He brings people in. His matches are always talked about, good or bad. But let's say Goldberg does take the title because they decide they want to put him in a marquee bout, figure something out. If that happens, Drew McIntyre is my pick to win the Rumble. If he loses that belt early in the show and then comes back to win the Rumble, whether or not he says, I'm going to go back and take this thing from Goldberg at Mania, or he says, I'm upset that I lost this match to Goldberg. I will deal with you later. But the man that I want is Roman Reigns. I don't think you could have a better of this era main event for WrestleMania this year without having to bring a legend in than Drew McIntyre, Roman Reigns. And there's a lot of stories you could tell. And I think Drew beating Roman does a lot for both of those guys as you kind of spin out into 2021.
I'm with you. I like the moment at the match. I don't know, Nick. To me, it doesn't even matter. But like, how great will that match be at Mania? I think it'll be very good because I think Drew and Goldberg's going to be good because McIntyre is going to make sure it's good.
Yeah.
Because we know what a Goldberg match looks like. I think that the Survivor Series match was a little overshadowed by the moment, which isn't a bad thing. Like that, it was a very quick build from Friday Night SmackDown to Monday's Raw, McIntyre winning the belt back. Like that was a pretty quick turnaround. One more SmackDown in the Survivor Series. I agree. That should be, if not, maybe you go with the women, but that's to me your top tier men's match. It's McIntyre and Roman. And why do you need part-time stars? You need to build the product, guys who are going to be on Raw the next night, SmackDown the next Friday. If Roman were to lose that match, I can't wait to see what he does next.
Yeah, dude, exactly. And McIntyre, he needs to, he's so much better chasing that title against a complete dick like Roman Reigns. I'm far more intrigued by that.
Have Roman cost him the belt. That match is interesting too, because you mentioned, because I know that happened with and McIntyre. I just did this piece. McIntyre is a huge Bret Hart disciple, and Bret obviously had the moment where he had the tag match and lost, and then he came back in the Rumble limping in and went on to glory there. So on to WrestleMania 10, and that was the spot with Luger, right? But yeah, I think that McIntyre could sell a rib injury because of the spear, whatever, right? I think there's a lot, like you said, not to overthink this, but to overthink this is a lot they can do. So that would be my pick for WrestleMania as well. I suppose Ronda Rousey could change that, but I would love to see a Drew McIntyre Roman Reigns match at WrestleMania.
Well, we'll put a button in it there for today, Justin. Thank you very much for, took a little over time here today as we just kind of got rolling on some of the news of the day. But yeah, man, tell people where they can find you, follow you, support you, all those great things.
I am on Twitter at Justin Barrasso. The Weekend Wrestling column posts every Wednesday. Usually, though, I've been doing stories usually Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. But if you follow me on Twitter, I'll always post my work there. It's at Justin Barrasso at Twitter. And if you're reading, thank you so much.